Hello, good afternoon. I hope you're all doing really well. I feel like it's been a long time since I've gone live, and I'm doing it in a really unconventional way because I'm in Melbourne and one of the network service providers has gone down in Melbourne, and it sort of got me sort of really thinking, gosh, what will we do when the internet, is disrupted? Which is, such an interesting it's such an interesting topic, probably one for another day. But today I'm here to talk again about ESG and specifically around the trends that are happening in the market and what we're seeing, how these trends in terms of how they're impacting businesses. So if you are joining me on the session, say hello and, ask questions. Don't feel shy. The whole point of these sort of live sessions is to kind of talk about topics that are really impacting the market and people are interested in learning more about. So if you don't know what ESG is, it's essentially a framework of thinking. And the intention, I think, now for ESG is for it to become the driving force around entire business governance and the way that the business thinks, the way that they behave, the relationships they have, the decisions they make, and so on. And so ESG really emerged out of the investor space where investors as stakeholders, drive a lot of key decisions, especially in bigger businesses. And so they realized the cost impacts of climate change and the cost impacts of a lack of social, human, economic sustainability as well as environmental. And so the big driver came around those financial impacts and measuring those. But now, I think ESG has become a really valuable tool beyond just the financial metrics, but also the physical, the transitional metrics around not just physical climate change and the obvious impact that it has on nature and the environment, but also on human systems and social systems. So if done correctly, as all of the experts really have confirmed, there is a lot of benefits to businesses, and those benefits go beyond the kind of standard cost and economic value, but also the value from building resilience in your business, lowering your risk profile, and sort of really building up your business reputation and your presence in the market as a leader and a business who is ready, because the global changes are happening, the government changes are happening, the legislative changes, the physical changes, the economic changes, the financial changes. So really there's a lot of different pressures now coming into the market. And it's interesting because it no longer is just a problem of the larger businesses. Even SBTI's recent release around what is an SME is that it is also these businesses that, sorry, when I say what is an SME, we all know that's a small to medium business, but why they are also very much part of the consideration around ESG. So it's not just about waiting for the bigger guys to take action and then wait for it to actually start to impact the medium-sized businesses, but that all of these frameworks, these global frameworks like SBTI, SASB, ISSB, and all of that, they're going to start looking at the SMEs very carefully and very closely. And so that's going to be very much part of the ESG remit, so to speak. So it's no longer just about the big businesses. It's absolutely for the medium-sized businesses as well. So, if your business is not thinking about it, not talking about it, not only are you not going to be prepared for when those changes do start to impact you, which will be really around the corner with every country and their own localized targets and their contributions to the Paris Agreement, but it will also start to impact the way that you operate with other businesses, global businesses who are ahead of the game, the way you interact with your various stakeholders, not just your investors, but your customers, your clients, the community that you impact. So essentially, there's really kind of, for me anyways, thinking around this, that this is a no-brainer. It's a great opportunity not only to reduce your impact in terms of climate change, but also to benefit from the opportunities that ESG presents. So if you're not aware, there are a lot of ESG frameworks out there. If anything, there's around over 600 out there at the moment. So there certainly is a lot. I can see a few of you live, by the way, on LinkedIn. So feel free to ask a question if you have one. But what I wanted to say is, with all of these frameworks out there, it's a lot of noise in the market. So figuring out where you need to focus as a business is probably the first biggest step that you need to take. And so, I can speak from the Australian context with the way that these various frameworks are now starting to consolidate and build sort of memorandums and understandings around how they will work together and how they will collaborate. The ones that we really need to look out for in Australia is the ISSB, or the one that we really need to look out for at the moment is the ISSB, and also the TNFD, which is gaining a lot of traction in the banking and finance space. And of course, GRI sort of always plays a very consistent role as well in our market. It's obviously going to be different for every sort of country, but there are some key ESG frameworks that you really need to be looking at. And I would say that in general, that would be ISSB or the TCFD or GRI and also the value reporting framework. So they all play a fundamental role, and they are also very much working together at the moment with a lot of politics and sort of bureaucracy around it, which you can't help when these organizations have been around for so long and they have a strong presence in the market. But I think that ultimately what we're going to see is a very clear consolidation process happening, and of course with the intention to have one way of, or I guess a unified way of thinking about ESG, because it's complex as it is. We don't need all of these frameworks telling us to do different things. So that's certainly happening, this consolidation process. So what I know is, from the work that I've been doing, is for clients who are not ready for the full-blown GRI framework or system of operations, what we tend to do is build out the initial materiality, the stakeholder discussions, the baselining work, the goal setting work that we do with clients. We do that on the fundamental principles of, say, GRI or the UN SDGs. We talk to them about what's important to them and then select those frameworks of thinking accordingly. So even if you're a small business, there's ways to do this at a smaller scale, or at least you could say it's probably not a light touch, but say a medium touch perspective, instead of having to do the full ESG framework. And this way it starts to get your business ready for those changes that are really around the corner. So, any questions anyways on anything that I am saying, please let me know. Please post it down in the comments. Just wanted to highlight that. But the thing that I wanted to talk about as well is, how is this changing landscape and the pressures that are coming up now around ESG, how are we seeing that play out in specific market trends? So some of the market trends that we're seeing is there's a lot more pressure now on corporates, especially board members, governments, to start upskilling in their ESG capabilities. So at that board level and that governance level, what are they doing to be climate diligent, essentially? And how are they capable enough with that in-house awareness and knowledge to be able to be climate diligent? The other thing is those pledges that governments, that corporates have made around net zero. How is that pledge now turning into an actual action plan? And how is that tangible and translating to real action, essentially? Moving away from sort of the light touch commitments as well that some countries, some corporates have made. For example, in the Paris Agreement, many countries have put forward their nationally determined contributions, their NDCs. And so Australia had a very sort of, you could say, a light touch commitment. And there's been a lot of growing pressure now. And that's why Australia has readdressed their NDC, because they know there's pressure from the various economies, if it's at a government level, or from the various businesses or market sectors at a corporate level, that they need to have better commitments, and those commitments need to, of course, translate into roadmaps. So essentially, the trend is, how do we take those policies or those commitments beyond words on paper into actual focused action plans that are focused on decarbonization or circular economy or biomimicry or natural capital, depending on what, of course, your business does and what they impact. So some of the other trends as well that we're seeing is there are these emerging regulations that are coming from this whole consolidation process, and these standards of reporting are becoming more credible, more detailed, focused, and not just kind of numbers to tick a box off. And that's where S&P Global really made that statement, that they're no longer just looking at the numeric metrics, and that's no longer even really part of their consideration, but actually the detailed report behind the ESG framework or the ESG governance system that a business has adopted. And that's how they're essentially transitioning these strategies into real action plans. Climate scenario analysis is another area that we're seeing a trend in, the higher frequency of climate scenario analysis. That's a fundamental part of the TCFD and the TNFD as well. So really considering climate scenario analysis as well as natural capital and biodiversity risks are becoming a very really an uptrend in the ESG space. So essentially, this is what is getting investors to think closely about where are they investing their money, and which is why even amongst my network, in fact, I had several conversations today itself, and I haven't even had lunch yet, that the investors are really trying to take their sustainable framework of investment or their sustainable commitments into a clear ESG framework and action plan that can show that their investment portfolios have ESG not just sort of sprinkled at a high level, but actually embedded within the entire recipe, so to speak, of their investment portfolio. So it's really interesting. And these are some of the trends that I'm starting to notice, and many of my colleagues are also noticing. So it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on that, if you have any. And I guess what I wanted to sort of tie this all up with is how ESG is starting to focus in terms of areas of importance. Because I guess the idea is that we're no longer going to be in the same economy or the same way of doing business. And really, business and the economy is changing so rapidly. So there's going to be an entire transition to a new way of interacting with each other, doing business, living our lives, because the new, hopefully more sustainable world where, because climate change is such an important conversation, is happening so much more frequently now, that it will, of course, transform the way that we live our lives and do business. And so some of the areas that ESG is starting to focus on now to help this process is there's an increasing focus on ethics and integrity, becoming more people focused, so social and human systems focused, and increasing that priority around ethics and integrity. The other thing is we're starting to see that supply chains are coming into the closer focus and zoom of our ESG thinking, because supply chain security, resilience, transparency, those are really important, especially in a climate change event or an adverse climate impact. Supply chains get disrupted straight away. COVID is just a small taster of what that can look like, where a complete supply chain is disrupted and some of the basic necessities of life are no longer available to us. And so supply chain resilience is a big one. And then the other thing is, how do we transition the workforce to a new way of doing business, new types of jobs, new ways of interacting with between businesses and between businesses and their clients. So the entire workforce is transitioning, and ESG is really focusing in on that. The other focus area is around First Nations, and being in Australia, recognizing the traditional owners of the land, the Indigenous Aboriginal people, and their contributions, and empowering them as well, and including them in a lot of the decision making is really important. And it's great to see that this is a trend of the ESG space, because on a personal note, I think that it is so important to have First Nations and Indigenous people as a part of the policy making and the framework development and execution around concepts of sustainability, circular economy, and so on, because they understand the connection to land, and they have always had this embedded in their culture of thinking that we don't just keep taking from the environment, but we actually have to find ways to work harmoniously with the environment. And I think that their culture kind of intrinsically holds that value and that way of thinking, and something that many of us in, say, in I guess really the Western world, or even the very developed Eastern side of the economy, that we need to go back to kind of some of that more fundamental way of thinking, which is so intrinsic in First Nations and their culture. And so, yes, that's really my own sort of side piece, but I just think it's such an important focus for ESG, and I'm glad to see that. And I guess the final thing in terms of a trend is really the dynamics in politics, and the way that governments are now starting to put in the regulatory or legislative systems in place that support ESG. It's certainly happening in Australia. The conversations are happening, and it's, well, very hopeful that it's going to lead to sort of an official framework or legislative process to establish how businesses can start to leverage ESG and start to embed ESG into their entire business operations. So yeah, it's a really interesting time we're in. And personally, I just think that all businesses should be thinking about this. It's such a great opportunity. And if you're not aware of the opportunity, open up those conversations, see what comes out of it. Or if you are aware of that opportunity and you have some concerns, then also have those conversations, or at the very least start somewhere small. And if you're not ready for it at all, then you know what, that's also okay. I think that ultimately we do have to be gentle with people in where they're at in this journey, and also decide, I know from my perspective as a consultant in this space, decide how much do we want to kind of pull people along versus how much do we want to elevate them and inspire them to join in this journey. Because personally, I think this is such an opportunity, and I'm hopeful that the right people come through this space, the right businesses, the right clients. And so, yeah, that's my thoughts on ESG and where it's at now, all of the trends. If you have any thoughts, any questions, let me know. Feel free to reach out separately as well. That's totally fine. Thank you to those who have joined me live. I really appreciate you being here. I hope you have an incredible day, and looking forward to doing this again soon. Take care, everybody. Okay. Bye.